Hello and welcome to all the men and women of the West. I'm Joe, and I'm just going to test to see if the audio is working.
That's right. It's Matthew from Dork, so my audio. Hopefully, you can hear me too.
Oh yeah, I can hear you. I don't know if the stream is working. Let's see. It's working. So
all right.
That's good. All right. So this stream was born from listening to your Finrod and Andreth discussion. Here, I'll just adjust my computer a little. One too many times because it's my favorite Tolkien Reading Day video, and I always refer back to it because it's what got me into the Fea and Roa and the metaphysics of the Legendarium. And you explained the discussion as well, both the human and elf drama, I guess. I was going to say human drama, but human and elf
drama.
And the metaphysical discussion really well. You broke it down really well. I'm going to have to later post a comment pinning the link to the video in question.
Yeah. That was a video on the, it was Tolkien Reading Day, 2022, and it was on love and friendship. I happened to be working on a video that a commenter had requested about Aegnor and Andreth. And I was like, well, this is one of those obscure love stories that not many people know about. Let's bring it into Tolkien Reading Day. So happy that you found it.
Yeah, I listened to all of them, and I loved that one, and I keep listening to it. So that's why I approached you, and I'm so very grateful that you agreed to
my pleasure.
On the show. And I'm just going to try something. Okay, there. We're zoomed in.
All right.
I just noticed. I'm not very good with all the functions on stream.
I will. You're preaching to the choir on that, so I'm.
But this story, just a little background about it, because I think a lot of people might need it. Those who aren't familiar with the whole story. If I miss anything, do jump in and correct me or fill it out. Now, this story is one that's not the easiest to read, to be quite honest. I've had to read it about 4 or 5 times in the history of Middle-earth and Morgoth's Ring, and I still feel like I'm not entirely familiar with everything.
It feels like two academics going at it in an academic discussion, which I guess it is, but that's kind of, it's Finrod and Andreth, and they've got some points. They're like, woo, okay.
Yeah.
You went to school. Okay, anyway, yeah.
And the background is that Andreth is a descendant of Beor the Old, who was the first man who kind of set eyes upon an elf, which was to say Finrod Felagund, this being years and years before the events of this story, which takes place sometime before the Battle of Sudden Flame, Dagor Bragollach, I believe it's called. And Andreth, being a descendant, has just lost her, I believe, grandfather, Borom.
Right, yeah.
And
it was
Borom.
Like 93.
Yeah, and now Finrod is, of course, a son of Finarfin, and Finarfin himself was son of Finwë, the guy whose poor decisions regarding his eldest son kind of led to some of the
dysfunctional family going on there, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and with Morgoth coming along, stealing the Silmarils and racing back to Angband to hide because, well, he doesn't really want to deal with Tolkas and Arome and all the rest of the Valar. He's having to hide it out, and currently the elves are sieging his great fortress, and he's hidden up there, probably creating Glaurung at this time, because he's got to have his hobbies.
Yeah. Glaurung, I think that was a very young Glaurung, kind of emerged and was chased back to Angband back about 100 years or so before this conversation happens. But yeah, so Glaurung is growing back in Angband at this time.
I got that detail wrong about the dates.
Yeah, well, he's just getting big, so he's getting ready to come out and be terrible.
Still, Morgoth has, I think it's Voice of Geekdom who once said he probably has an R&D division or something.
Right.
He's developing
Yeah.
all these big dragons and creatures that will come to haunt, later eras and whatnot. So everyone thinks he's well and truly contained for the moment, but he's not. But Finrod and Aegnor know the truth. He's not contained. And I think that now this is just going to be me interjecting this with regards to Fingolfin, because I'm a Fingolfin fanboy.
Oh, sure.
Fingolfin, I think, suspected what the future had in store, in that Morgoth walls. So that was another reason why he banged on those gates and told them, "Come on out, you coward." And Fingolfin's decision, very impulsive as it was, got him done in. And so the Noldor are now rallying around Fingon, but Fingon's kind of a figurehead for Maethros, who's the more charismatic and savvy, and probably the better fighter of the two. But Maethros and Fingon are essentially bound together by a semi-Germanic oath of brotherhood. So there's not going to be any political drama between the two. But as to the Doriath elves, they're all still behind their great king Thingol, who is daddy to Luthien, who's growing up. And her and her dad are awaiting the Baron drama, which has not yet come out, because this is before Baron and Luthien, which lies on the horizon to an extent. Andreth is a relative to Baron, and I believe she's a cousin of sorts.
She is Barahir's aunt, meaning that she's Baron's great aunt.
Okay, thank you. I always get this part of the family tree wrong, but I get other parts right. So I really
well, it's weird when you think of humans and then you think of elves, and because their time, as we're going to be talking about, their time on this earth is so short. It's a weird, when you think of family trees, an elven family tree versus a human family tree looks very different. So you think like, wait, how close in time are they? Oh, right. Okay. That's your great aunt. Got it.
I'm going to have to do a Great House video later on the House of Bayor, just so that make sure I get it right in my head for next time. But yeah, Andreth, though, is visited by Finrod, I believe, and the two start to engage in a rather Socratic kind of dialogue. And this dialogue is honestly one of the most fascinating parts. And I hope people don't mind me criticizing Christopher a little. I love the man. I admire him exponentially. Yeah, peace. And I feel safe saying, as someone who's semi-religious, God rest his soul. But I think that he made a mistake by not including the story of Andreth in the Silmarillion. And far be it for me to criticize him. I don't know about you, but I would have included it because it's such a great story.
It's a great story, but it also gives so much information about Finrod in particular. Yes, it gives info to Aegnor and Andreth, but in some ways the focus of this, the reason I think that Tolkien had Finrod talking to Andreth and not Aegnor, I mean, that would be an interesting conversation too, but the reason he made it Finrod, Aegnor's brother, is because I think he's trying to set up the mindset that Finrod will have when he agrees to aid Beren and Luthien in their love story.
Yeah.
And that's a huge part of Finrod's development, let's say.
Yeah. Oh, I was about to say, this is character development we're seeing here. Right at the start, he's going, it could never work. But by Beren and Luthien, he's basically what's the term? I think it's an English term, shipper on deck or something.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, his oath has something to do with it too, because he gives his ring, whatever. He hasn't, but still, he lays down his life in this, in the name of this impossible quest that will eventually lead to a human and an elf having a loving relationship. And so, just to start from where he starts in the beginning of this debate to that moment is pretty huge.
Yeah, and at the start, we get, like, in the first few paragraphs, because I've got a ton of notes, about almost 2 pages of notes.
Me too.
We have because I wanted to make sure I was ready for this, and I still don't feel ready. But
no, it's complicated for sure.
I think we've covered enough background. If we ended up forgetting anything, you could.
I'll say one thing, one little fun note. Andreth meets Aegnor at the lake known as Tar Nailuin. And its other big claim to fame, essentially, is that's the region where Barahir, Baron, and the rest of their outlaws successfully hid from Morgoth for a time. So it's kind of got this like connection to the House of Beor, kind of interestingly. I don't know. Anyway,
Yeah.
So those are like the two big moments of in Tolkien's mythology that Ailuin really comes up, and they happen to be both associated with the House of Beor.
That's fascinating. Thanks.
Oh, yeah. Just throw that. Oh, I'll throw this out. I was just thinking about this right as I was about to come and talk to you. It's Friday the 13th.
Oh, yeah.
And there is an actual reference to 13 being an unlucky number in The Hobbit.
Oh, yeah.
So the dwarves are questioning Bilbo's inclusion into the company, and Gandalf basically gives him this verbal slap with this. I wrote the quote out. You asked me to find the 14th man for your expedition, and I chose Mr. Baggins. Just let anyone say I chose the wrong man or the wrong house, and you can stop at 13 and have all the bad luck you like, or go back to digging coal. And I go, anyway, but yeah, so 13 is unlucky in Middle-earth, as it has the reputation for in our world.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Thank you for both.
Just a little something.
That's a treat. And ironically, I just got finished publishing on our horror channel, Nightmare Reviews, a review of a Friday the 13th fan film.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
It all connects.
It's all connected.
It all connects. But yeah, at the start of the story, Finrod, though, is fairly grief-stricken for Beor, because to mankind, it's been quite some time. But for Finrod, this has been almost a blink of an eye, and his really good friend Beor has passed. So I'm going to jump in, but once again, if there's anything else you want to add, join in, and the chat can join in and whatnot. I always appreciate all the corrections I can get. But Finrod is coming here seemingly for a bit of comfort, and apparently he's also grief-stricken over Boron, and he's kind of going, man, it seems like yesterday, like I was great buddies with your ancestors. What, I can't believe they're already gone. While for Andreth, she is not the young maiden that Aegnor kind of dumped, but she's now this bitter, weathered old woman.
I did the math, and she's approximately 50 years old this time, somewhere in that vicinity. So
okay,
just FYI.
So a little past middle-aged.
Yeah,
and yeah, so she's a little bitter about the breakup.
a little,
just a
yes,
wee bit.
Yeah.
But the whole debate is one that starts with her commenting on kind of the differences between men and elves, and how the Eldar tend to treat men as though they are fragile, which kind of, and not in so many words, but it's something which what she's really commenting on, I think, is, well, and it's pretty much outright stated, is that men seem strange to elves. But there's a great quote earlier by, I think, a member of the House of Hador, where if elves can think of men as enemies after they fought side by side, then the minds of elves are strange indeed to men, or something to that effect. So that by the time of this discussion, the two races have been living together for a while, but they still don't understand each other.
No, not at all, for sure.
And this story is really the start of when they're going to start to hash it out, discuss it, and start to reach some sort of understanding between them. With with the real discussion starting with Andreth commenting on how death was visited upon men by Morgoth, and that he's the one who tainted them.
Yeah, there's this sense of I think, the beginning of this conversation seems to be Andreth is saying, hey, we look at you, elves, and we see maybe that was the original intent for us. We were supposed to also be essentially immortal beings, but when the Valar came and took the invited the elves back to Aman, we didn't get that. We had to stay here and deal with Morgoth, and then Morgoth has cursed us to these short lifespans that we weren't originally given. And it's Finrod's like, I don't think Morgoth has that much power. I think this is actually the original design. The original design is to have a mortal lifespan, and so there's that kind of a debate going on.
Yeah, and if you look at the lives of the three children of Iluvatar, you look at elves; they're essentially immortal. Essentially, right. They're bound to Arda, and you have, heck, even the elves of Doriath. They stayed in Middle Earth, and yet they're bound to Arda, and they are just as immortal as those who went across the Great Sea and came back. And you have the dwarves, who have a slightly longer lifespan than men, I believe.
They do.
And so you have a diminishing in the lifespans as you're kind of going down in the pecking order. So Finrod makes a good argument when he says, I think this is kind of the original design. This is how it's supposed to be. But Andreth doesn't like that point.
Well, he does bring up like a little compromise in that he admits that, yes, there's this thing called the marring of Arda, which is, Morgoth has basically tainted the land. So if you live on the land, over time, your body, your Hroa, weakens. But it's not you go from immortal to a 90-year lifespan. It's a matter of degrees. But eventually, if the elves living in Middle Earth and not in Aman their bodies would basically be corrupted to the point that they would be spirits. That hasn't happened yet in the timeline that even we know, all the way into the Third Age. So that takes a while. But theoretically, if they were around in Middle Earth long enough, they would feel that corruption.
Yeah, the elves have a process of diminishing over the ages, and you have in turn men who do not seem to suffer the same kind of diminishing effect in the same way that the elves do. They are marred in a way, but not in the same way. And Finrod, his understanding of the nature, both biology and metaphysics of the elves in this story is, I'm just going to gush over it. It is astounding how much he knows. On the other hand, it's like you said, it's basically two PhD candidates or professionals going at it. And
she's a wise woman,
Yeah, I actually pretty much came from a background originally of academics, so I got to see a lot of professors going at it and going, no, the record says this. This is what they meant. No, you're wrong. They meant this. And then there'd be things like, why did Charles I word it like this? How come he didn't word it like that? Well, obviously he meant this. Or maybe he meant that. And they just go at it over the
right. You argue over a clause in the middle of a giant paragraph or something. Yeah.
Actually, I have seen that. So it's one of those charming little traits about us academics. I saw a post the other day. We're the most entitled, snobby, and underpaid individuals on the planet.
It's a great combination. Snob and underpaid.
Yeah. And it's one of those funny little jokes about him. But Andreth kind of responds with, yes, but we're not corrupted and marred in the same way. How you are marred is different from us. Like we were the original design was not for us to perish within 90 years, but rather to live out to the kind of lifespan you've got, without, the current baggage. But the trouble is, we kind of messed up. And how that part happens is a fascinating tale of its on its own. With now, this is kind of almost an aside story, like almost after, with Andreth kind of referring to what another wise woman had taught her, and it's how the disaster was brought about by a couple of bickering voices. I say a couple of bickering voices, but really it was one voice from the dark, another voice, and one would give instructions, and men began to get a little confused over which one to listen to. And they ultimately chose the wrong voice and defied the voice they shouldn't have, so that they were stripped of their, I guess you could say, immortality. And
we could call it immortality. I get it. It's a term of art.
It's a weird story. Yeah, it's a weird story. It has biblical references to an extent. Like I'm not trying to be too Christian about it, but it's just there are echoes of that story. Tolkien was obviously borrowing, but there's also it also took me back to an extent to Japanese and Nordic mythology in a way.
Okay.
Mostly when it came to Japanese, it was just their old folk tales about voices in the dark whispering the wrong thing to men, and men being tricked by it, or women being tricked, to be fair, and making the wrong decisions. There's all sorts of folklore the Japanese have on that. You never listen to the voice in the dark. You
can't tell who's speaking. Maybe question the source. Maybe that's
it. Whereas with the Norse, it just reminded me of a few stories with Loki.
Right.
It's kind of the Norse devil. And at least in the classical Norse sagas, he was more akin to
he's a trickster, and he would, deliberately deceive.
Yeah. He's a lot more demonic than he is in Marvel, where he's mostly, I'm just saying, in comparison, harmless. Whereas in the Norse stories, didn't want to mess with that guy. But yeah, the problem is the voice in the dark, I think, is supposed to be Melkor. The other voice. I'm caught between thinking it's Eru Iluvatar, but that would require him to have entered Arda. So I'm kind of leaning more towards Manwë. I don't know about you.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, the implication seems to be an Eru versus Melkor, just because it's Finrod who keeps bringing up Eru. Like, look, this was Eru's design. Our spirits are created by the sacred fire, and so it's set up with the idea that the implication would be that the other voice is Eru. But you've got a good point that perhaps that's a little too on the nose. That maybe it would be something like Manwë acting on, trying to be a voice of reason. From afar.
It's just like I originally was like, I made a note, Eru, like I put a question mark, and I went back to the story, and I went, but if he's existing outside and he's not yet entered the world, who's the other voice? And this led to me getting a headache and scratching my head and rereading the
story. Because this passage is only, it's a few dozen pages or whatever. It's not. There are lots of room for interpretation in a lot of these moments, and so that would certainly be one of them. That's one of the reasons they're like, oh, I wish he'd have been able to spend more time on it. I'm actually, whatever, not to like, hey, come to the Dork Lords, but I'm working on a video right now of another partially finished story. It's the Tal Elmar story from the Peoples of Middle Earth, where Tolkien wrote about this guy living in the Second Age, and he's basically being colonized by Numenor, but the story doesn't finish, and so there's all of these implications. Like, okay, who's in the right? What exact time is this taking place? What are the political stakes? Like, there's a lot of stuff that I'd love to know, but I can't know, and so I'm, that's what theory crafting's about. But anyway, so it's a similar, like, oh, there's this fraction of a story that's really cool, but we do have to kind of fill in the gaps.
Hey, plug that video away.
That's right. I'm editing it now, which always takes forever, but it is recorded and I'm editing it. So there you go.
Okay. Well, like I said, I'm going to enjoy that. But I think that, oh, shoot, I lost my train of thought there.
Sorry, threw you off.
Yeah. Well, no, it's just.
So you're talking about the voices being Eru versus Manwë.
Yeah. Yeah. And, oh, right. Now, at the end, you have some of the men and women who turn to cruelty because they're lured into savagery by Morgoth, which has me wondering, because I think it's in the Lost Tales with Fankill, Melkor's kind of seneschal in the east, who's there to drive kind of, he's kind of like Sauron over there. And yet, that story doesn't go anywhere, but I really like the story of Fankill. And I kind of wonder, is this when the story kind of slips into that tale? Like, where does that fit in? Where does this fit in? Like, it's a puzzle in a way. Like, it's this puzzle.
We know certainly that Morgoth, came upon the early men and terrorized them in ways. So the fact that they would be hearing his voice makes sense in a lot of ways.
And it's something which I think that, what was it? It's called The Gift of Iluvatar, Death, that is. And the idea is that, and I think even Finrod, to some extent, basically all but states this is a gift. It's not a curse.
Right.
And the trouble is, Andreth doesn't say it in so many words, but she's like, well, you can return a gift. This is not, it doesn't feel like it.
Well, it's also easy for someone whose span is potentially millions of years to say, hey, you who are going to die by age 100, you've got this gift. You get to die. You're like, okay, well, yeah, thanks, guy who looks like, immortal. But I mean, the idea being that your spirit, a human spirit transcends the circles of Arda. So we'll go on past Arda's existence. Whereas the elves, their lifespan is the lifespan of Arda. So when Earth essentially dies, elves die. Whereas humans, who their bodies died long ago, their spirits will be living on past.
In the halls. In the halls of Mandos. And spoilers, you have Dagorath, the end of the world, the great Ragnarok battle. And then you have the second music of the Aegnor. And humans get a role to play, and I think even dwarves, but elves are kind of, they're kind of going, wait, what about us?
But it's so far in this imagined future that it's like, at some point.
It's Girl Next Gondor who made a great point about how the marriages of Tuor and Idril, that is to say, Idril being a granddaughter of Fingolfin, and Tuor being a cousin of Turambar, and Beren and Lúthien's union. With these unions, men and elves are bound together. So this means that since they're all one big happy family,
good point.
Can you please put in a good word for us humans? Because we'd really appreciate this solid. And it's one of the most remarkable aspects that this story kind of leads into that to a great degree. And we'll get to that. It's a great part of the story. I'm just glancing at my notes. But she explains that death is pretty final for men. And I think we then start to get into the love match issue. And I think you worded it really well in your video where Aegnor, the sharp flame, ghosted Andreth, and she did not appreciate it.
Right. So he turned away from her without saying why. And so she was like, wait, I thought we were in love. Then he just avoided her, and she never saw him again. And neither of them ever found anyone else. And so they just had this unrequited love. Both of them were basically, I'm in love with someone, but I am not with them. And it seemed like On Aegnor's part, it was intentional. They're like, oh, and it was actually. I mean, he was choosing to stay away from that love relationship.
Yeah, he was afraid, and I think to get into his end. Now, Finrod kind of tries to defend his brother because
he's
family.
His brother.
And yeah, and the funny thing is that he's basically visiting his brother's ex, so this is a little
I know.
awkward.
I know. It's like, yay. Anyway, no, I mean, he really liked you.
For example, I can't even imagine Dan visiting my ex or something and going, hey, let's hang out, let's talk about, metaphysics and whatnot. That'd be like, I think she'd go, what?
Right.
I wouldn't blame her. She'd be like, what?
Yeah. Like, look at the time. I have a watch now. I'm leaving.
Yes. But the thing here is Finrod tries to defend his brother and say it was not for lack of love that he turned away from you. It was that, like elves, his first excuse, as you dubbed it, was that elves don't mate and produce children during times of war. But this is the long peace, so that's a
long peace.
It's a fib.
And it's been the long peace for a while. It's not like, 2 years ago. No. It's the long peace was in effect for hundreds of years. I mean, obviously by an elf's term, maybe that's not long, but
technically the elves do have kids even when at war.
Right. You're saying that. I mean, as I put, like, I was thinking, this is the most peaceful time in the first age. I think objectively. So you're saying no elf married anyone during this time, and we know that's not true because we know elves did get married during the first age. Hence, this argument is bunk.
Well, I'll give a few examples real quick, and some of them will include some human matches. But you have Idril and Tuor.
That perfectly counts.
Idril and Tuor. Gondolin is technically in a state of war. You've got now this couple did not come to be because there was unrequited love, but you had I forget her name, but you have the Orodreth's daughter with Turin. She wanted to marry Turambar. She was supposed to marry someone else, but the marriage would have gone through, but her fiance didn't really decide to go through with it because he was crippled, at least had, I think, his hand chopped off.
Right, but the reasoning wasn't, it's a time of war, we can't get married. Like, the marriage was on, and then it was off, but yeah.
And you also have Dior and his bride. So, and they produced a couple of kids. And you had, of course, Eorendil and Elwing. So the whole argument, we don't produce children during times of war. What about all those couples?
And of course, some of that's half elven, blah, blah, blah. But yes, agreed. And I mean, Luthien and Baron, I mean, they got married. Yeah. And it was certainly violent times were happening at that. So, this argument, because they're in literally Tolkien calls it the long peace. and other elves are getting married during this time. I feel like it feels more like an excuse than it does an actual reason to be like, we can't be together.
And the trouble is that, on the other hand, there's a sad piece of dialogue about that she pretty much says is, she kind of asks, well, why didn't he stick around with me? When I had grown old, I would not have hobbled after him. I wouldn't have embarrassed him that way, which is a terribly tragic line. Essentially, the implication being she exiled herself from him, and when she reached old age, in order to keep from hurting him. And at least that's what she says. But
right,
which that seems a little cruel, especially to her. I'm just saying, because
I just wonder. I saw that more as she was willing to at least have that conversation. When that time comes, I wouldn't be like, no, you have to. If he was just dead set on, look, you're too old now, then she would have agreed. I think it's kind of the idea. I think her hope would have been, Aegnor would have said, oh, well, we love each other. I don't care that you're not young anymore. I'm still with you. But
yeah,
yes,
she was willing to, if you wanted a separation, she'd go for it. Because she's like, we'll have the conversation, and if he wants us to be separated, that's it. No harm, no foul. But the trouble is, he exiled himself from her, and at least when I read it, I thought she had more love for him in a way than him for her.
Yeah, I wonder about that too. What's that?
He was afraid.
See if I can find this
commitment.
line.
There was. Oh, please do.
It's the one where Finrod is trying to say, "Hey, this way, because he left you when he did, he'll only have memories of the young you. So he won't have memories of the old you, and he'll just be able to even when he's in the halls of Mandos, he'll be able to just remember that young, beautiful woman by the lake, and not old woman. Why would he want to remember that?" I'm like, what the hell? Yeah. What kind of reasoning? I mean, it's a thing where it's an elf not realizing humans have relationships, and we grow old together, and people die, and it's a thing. It's coming from the standpoint of someone who has no idea what that type of relationship is like. It's anyway.
And this is more of a horror series, but in the anime from the 90s, Yu Yu Hakusho, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it.
Yeah, what's that again?
Yu Yu Hakusho.
Okay, I'm not familiar with it, but yeah, okay. Enlighten me.
In there was a discussion between a villainous character and a heroic character, where the villainous character says that you should, because he chose immortality over mortality, because he said, I want to be turned into a demon, I want to be immortal. But his common law partner said, no thanks, I'm running the other way. And the thing is, he ended up telling her, essentially her adoptive child in a way, because she plays an Obi-Wan to another character is kind of Luke. And he says, well, you should feel grateful that I'm trying to basically do you in, and that you have not had to experience what I did, which is to see her grow old and wretched. And what the main character responds with is with a great deal of wisdom and says, no, because I'm not a coward like you. I look forward to growing old with her.
Right. Because I found the line. So Finrod is talking about Aegnor, and he says, now he will ever remember thee in the sun of morning, and that last evening by the water of Ailuin, in which he saw thy face mirrored with a star caught in thy hair, ever until the north wind brings the night of his flame. It's like, okay, fine. Yay, he remembered you as young. That would not be any kind of relation to me as Andreth in that moment. It's like, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah, it's no consolation. It's cold comforts. Because she's to grow old, and in the afterlife, they have no idea where she's going, because that's part of the discussion. Where do men go after they meet their end? We know where elves go, into the halls of Mandos. We don't know where men go. That's to be confirmed in the next story. And the thing about this part is that she basically says, like, this is cold comforts. What will I get? In the end, like, he left me with nothing.
She has an amazing comeback on this whole bit about how, oh, look, he'll remember you as a youngster, blah, blah, blah. And then she says, yeah, so she's like, I don't get to go to the halls of Mandos. So very well, I may get entirely. When I go on, my spirit might forget Aegnor entirely. So she says, what shall I remember? And when I go halls, and when I go to what halls shall I come? To a darkness in which even the memory of the sharp flame shall be quenched? Even the memory of rejection, that at least. So she's like, yeah, I suppose I might, wherever we go, I might forget Aegnor entirely, but at least I can forget about him rejecting me. So there's that. It's like, oh, yeah, it's a good point. And I should point out here, I think a huge aspect of this conversation that I think really flips it on its head is that in the middle of it, Finrod admits, hey, I have foreseen Aegnor's going to die. And you're going to outlive him. Andreth are going to outlive him. So he's going to die before you. that totally gets rid of all of this stuff about, oh, he's gonna, while you get old, he's gonna have to watch you, and then he's gonna live on and have to grieve over the loss. No, he'll be dead. She's gonna be doing the grieving. She's accepting the look. That's fine with me. We have a life together, and he eventually is slain in the Battle of Sudden Flame. Then I accept that, because we're humans. We accept that all the time. This happens. And so for him to even acknowledge that it's not a situation where, oh, yes, the Aegnor is going to live for 10,000 more years. And I mean, he's just going to be grieving for you the whole time. No, you're going to out. So it's just weird that even that potential argument he undercuts by saying, oh, by the way, I prophesize, and I prophesize perfectly, and Aegnor is going to be dead before you. So I'm like, wow, okay. What, and your point? But yeah, anyway.
But what's interesting there is also that but what's also interesting is that Finrod basically points out, like, it would have been crueler to drag you along. And I've heard, well, the end is always cruel, or something to that. Like, the discussion kind of leads into him. It's like, it would have been crueler. And I've heard, well, the end is always cruel for men. Like, for us, it's always, death is always cruel.
It's just a thing they have to acknowledge. Elves don't, they just can't, they can think of it academically, but they can't actually imagine what it's like to have a 90-year lifespan. And in fact, there's this, and I brought it up a few different times in different videos, but it's a really amazing prose in the appendices. It's when Arwen is basically on the deathbed of Aragorn.
Oh, yeah.
And she says this really powerful line where she's like, look, I always basically hated Ar-Pharazôn and Númenóreans, and I saw them as villains because they tried to go and conquer Aman for the sake of immortality. And I thought, oh, you're terrible people. But now that I am having to acknowledge that I am mortal, I can now, while I don't think they're heroes, I can now empathize with what they were going through. She has a bit of empathy now because she is in that same place and like wishing she had more time. Anyway, it was really interesting. Yeah, or wish Aragorn had more time. Right, they had more time
Aragorn
together.
Basically tells her, "Don't tempt me. This is my fate." Like,
yeah.
He doesn't say it in so many words, but he does essentially refer to the Stoic philosophy of love thy fate.
And he's like, hey, you go on and you can go back to, she's like, I can't go. The boats are gone. But for her, it would be like, I couldn't go on. But she's like, no, I'm here and I'm going to pass away. But she's an elf who has now having to acknowledge mortality, immediate mortality, or within the next, and it's something that we see all folks like Finrod acknowledging only in this academic way. It's kind of fun to see that.
Well, we'll get to that in a minute. I just wanted to go through the chat a little. But this Friday 13th, the 13th Friday is lucky to have you discussing this great story.
Oh, awesome. Thanks, Nora.
We have Anonymous. So I wonder, do the Easterlings and those men around the Dark Lords live shorter lives than, say, men on the good side? I mean, the Darkening of Númenor says that men started living shorter lives.
It's interesting. Actually, I was just commenting on my Tall Elmar that I'm doing this video on. It's about these, what I consider to be like proto-Dunlandings. So it's like the House of Halath folks, but they were worshiping Sauron. It's kind of like the Men of Dunharrow, like that culture. And they're in this story, they're like, they get essentially cursed, or if you saw prophecy versus curse, but they are finding that their fortunes and their lives are definitely shortening and going for the worse. So I suppose there is a bit of that they're experiencing.
I always took it as the curse of short life for a lot of these Easterlings is that they're going to be fighting in battles that will they're basically seeking out wars in battles, so that's going to shorten their life. And
that's true.
Even if they survive, who knows if Sauron or Morgoth won't just experiment with them, try to turn them into orcs.
Natural lifespan versus unnatural. But yes, if your cause of death is half the people in the village just got, their heads cut off. And yeah, your average lifespan goes down quite a bit.
Oh, yours. I think Epic Kingdom addressing you, Dork Lords. You should do an audiobook.
Oh, well, thank you, Epic Kingdom. Yeah, I actually did a fair amount of voiceover work back in the day. But I've thought, anyway, I've thought about doing an audiobook. I appreciate the encouragement. That might be an inspiration for me to pick up something like that. But thank you.
Fascinating line of work. You should pick it up. And
I did a lot of commercials. So I was like, anyway.
Still honest work.
That's right. Kansas City's beer. Anyway, there you
go. Okay, this was the last place where I would think I can hear Yu Yu Hakusho analogy. Yeah, that's my
Well said, Nora. Well said.
I'm a kid of the 90s. What can I say? And yeah, but
I'm gonna have to look this up now. I feel I feel like I'm not bringing something to the party. So there you go.
It's fine. It's a very philosophical, if very brutal, dark, and gory. Semi Dragon Ball Z meets horror, like very, very dark horror and slasher. And
gotcha. All right, fair enough.
And very
gritty,
Japanese.
Grim.
Yeah, it's very grim, but it's a very fascinating series, and they get into both positive and negative ideas and philosophies, intergenerational conflict, and other stuff like that. But that's enough plugging you, Hawk Show.
Hey, it's fun.
But and it's also edited by, I think, the Sailor Moon writer, because the two are married.
All right. Now you're getting into more.
That's just a little fun fact.
I gotcha.
But the thing with Aegnor leaving when he did is that, yeah, I tend to think of him as a bit of a coward of commitment, but I also think that Finrod Felagund throwing in, by the way, he doesn't have long to live, I think was also, I wonder what the timeline was for the relationship and that prophecy. If maybe the relationship had started and the prophecy might have been delivered to him and he kind of got cold feet.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think we know for sure whether Finrod revealed that prophecy to Aegnor.
Okay.
You can interpret it. And in fact, one of Finrod's prophecy of his own demise, when, in the Baron and Luthien story, he tells Galadriel about it. They're having a dinner. He has this meeting. He's like, hey, yeah, by the way, I've foreseen my own death and the destruction of my kingdom. So he is willing to tell his relatives about his prophecies. So I think it suggests that he might have gone over to Aegnor. That's a tough conversation to have. But I just saw your death in a prophecy. So just FYI, it's coming. I don't know.
So can you pass the pickles?
What's that? Yeah, what's that? Yeah, right.
It's like, I predicted your doom. It shall come in a battle of great flame. And by the way, pass the pickles.
Exactly.
There.
Well, nice. This is great wine. Anyway, yeah, you're dead. Oh boy, it's terrible. So I don't know. We don't know for sure if Aegnor was imparted with that wisdom. But you're right. If he did, maybe that would have affected his decisions.
I wonder if it did, and if maybe that's why he broke and fled and went, oh no, I can't have this relationship. But if he didn't know, that means it was not the prophecy that got him to get scared, but just his own decision. He arrived at the conclusion that he was not ready to commit to her because she's going to pass away in the blink of an eye to him.
Or let's take it at face value. I think we can say that maybe not every elf ascribed to we can't have relationships during wartime. But let's assume for a second that perhaps Finrod's family did ascribe to that. Because we do see that Finrod, he has a love, Amarie. He leaves her because of his oath, and he leaves her back in the west, and he comes east, and with the intention, with the doom of Mandos, he has no expectation of ever seeing her again. As a matter of fact, he does get reborn, so maybe he did get to be with her again, but he never had that expectation. So from his point of view, this is what you do. Duty over love. I have a duty, I have an honor or an oath. I got to do it. So long, relationships. And so maybe that, that mindset was the same with the family. I don't know, perhaps.
Well, it is possible. I'm just going to turn over my notes, and it is possible because there's not really almost any of the other Finarfinians. I don't know if that's a term, but
sure, we'll call them that. I like that. I like that. Sounds cool, actually. I'm in.
Finarfinians don't really get together with anyone during the first age, except maybe Galadriel, I think. And even then, she doesn't really go on to have kids until sometime later. Or at least she doesn't have Celeborn until, I think, the second age.
Right. There's a lot of different versions of their relationship. Anyway, but yes, you're right. I think the most canonically accurate version, they get together later, much later in the first age.
Yeah. So it's a matter that they don't really seem to get together with anyone during this era. So you've got a very big culture clash between her saying, well, you have to live while you can. You have to see Carpe Diem. You have to seize the day, because if you keep putting it off to tomorrow, you'll never live. But Finrod has left his wife behind and has, as you said,
I don't know that they were technically married at the time, but his love, let's say his true love.
His love. Oh, okay. He left behind his love. He's got no expectation. And in terms of his character development, he seems like a man who's kind of resigned himself in a way. And at least that's how I like to read it. He seems resigned to an extent, but as this story is progressing, as he's hearing about the fate of men and women, and asks Andreth, have you no hope? Because he's realizing she's a woman without hope, and he's kind of without hope to an extent. And this seems to bring some to his soul, because the fates of men and elves are now, he's realizing more and more, are intertwined. And the character development leads into the Baron and Luthien story, whereupon he's going to, as we've already explained, he's gonna play wingman for Baron. So the story is also about his character development, as said, and it's really interesting that he ends up kind of explaining that in Quenya, I think it is, hope is called, the term for hope also means looking up for the elves, which has cultural connotations, because the first things they looked up at was the stars. So that probably inspired hope in them. And this is a very fascinating way of looking at hope itself, as something that you always look up at for, rather than looking down or something. And you've got,
well, interestingly, the last line of this passage of the text, I think it's very like, it feels appropriate, and it feels like this moment of coming together between them. They've had this debate, and Finrod is offering kind of a, hey, we're in this together. And he says, but you are not for Arda. Whither you go, may you find light. Await us there, my brother and me. So it's like the whither you may go, may you find light. It's kind of that same idea of like, wherever it is, wherever that beyond the circles of the earth you go, I hope you are finding this solace as well. Anyway, I thought that was a really for a guy who they've been pretty contentious, and for him to end on this conciliatory note, I thought was really, really nice.
Well, I think that he ends it on more than just a conciliatory note. He ends it on a very compassionate, almost loving note, almost like a brother with a sister. He's like, I know you've not had an easy life, and I know this has been a contentious argument, but I don't want us to part in conflict. So I hope when you perish, I want you to know you're going to someplace, to a better place, and that we're going to wait for you there in some capacity. On the other hand,
I find it really touching as well. Right before that, that's like a line or two before that, where she's saying, you know, you're going to go see Aegnor on the front and tell him not to be reckless, not to seek danger beyond need. And he said, I will tell him, but I might as well tell thee not to weep. He is a warrior, Andreth, and a spirit of wrath in every stroke.
Oh yeah, there's that quote.
And so, but it's interesting. He says, I might as well tell thee not to weep. It's just, there's an interesting symmetry in that. Flash forward to Finrod sacrificing himself for Beren. And as he's dying, he's basically having his dying lines with Beren. Beren weeps over his body. And so we have this kin of Andreth weeping for the loss of Aegnor in this thing. Anyway, but it's just kind of
it ties
these
together
illusions.
Because you've got Beren who's beside himself of trauma and grief, and also in a moment that's also very reminiscent, I would argue, kind of World War I in the trenches, when you'd find the guy next to you
Tolkien
dead.
would have certainly known about.
Yeah, and even probably World War II as well. And he's beside himself with grief, and you've got Finrod who's dying in his arms essentially. And yeah, it's a great way of tying Beren in with Andreth. And I just love how she just turned out so bitter. But then as the dialogue is progressing, Tolkien cracks her open a little and shows the suffering soul inside. Yeah. And he does something that he doesn't do with, for example, Feanor, where we see that behind the armor, there's someone very human, even someone very compassionate in there. Whereas with Feanor, behind the armor, we get him basically dying going, oh, this was a bad idea, chasing after Morgoth and everything. And he goes, oh, well, we all get those days.
I still say he did a lot of bad things in his time, but maybe the worst thing that Feanor did is, as he's dying and his sons are around him, he realized, it says in the text is something like, he looked and he saw the towers of Thangarodrim and realized they would never be breached. This was a completely losing action. And he still reminds them of their oath as he dies. Like, he could have in that, like, just take, I mean, I get it. He couldn't because of the doom of Mandos, blah, blah, blah. But he could have in that moment said, you know what? I realize now this is a dumb idea. You do not have to hold your oaths. I do not hold you to your oaths, sons. I free you as I die. Nope, didn't do it. He's like, no, you're gonna have to die too. Please die in a pointless cause. Thank you. Like, God bless that guy. Yeah, he was very prideful. Could not admit he was wrong ever.
No, even when he knew he was wrong.
Yeah.
And
it's just honestly, that Tolkien spell. He knew he was wrong. He was dying. His sons were there, and he still was like, no, what are you talking about? Nope. Like, wow.
Yeah. He's actually he's one of Dan, my brother and co-host on his channels, one of his favorite characters from the Legendarium. And I mean,
he's so flawed, but he's not. Yeah, I don't know. He also has these redeeming qualities, so it's an interesting thing. But I would say he's a villain. It's just he is a very interesting villain in that way.
Yeah, I would argue he is the spirit of fire in that we're all drawn.
Right, we have that Fea in the beginning of his name.
Yeah, he's fire itself. Anyone who reads is drawn to his flame. Like, for example, a moth to the flame. But as Andreth, which is a bit of a pun tying in with Andreth, as she says, does the moth pity the candle before the wind blows it out, or does the candle pity the moth?
Yeah. It's do candles pity moths, or moths candles when the wind blows them out? So yeah, and we have that fire motif certainly comes through for sure. Which
does tie
Aegnor,
in with
the sharp flame,
with the Roa, which is to say the body, and Fea, which is to say the spirit. That the Roa anchors the Fea into the mortal realm, and I guess you could say I'm just roughly, but the Roa is the armor or the raiment, I think it's described, around the Fea, and the Fea is the true soul or spirit within the individual. So that, what is it? I think a friend of mine once described it as the reason he believes that in that even animals and whatnot, and that we do all have souls, is that we are more than just atoms. How come even a dog can feel pain or grief or sorrow or joy? Even a bear can, even men can. So we're more than just a matter of our flesh, is how one of my friends, I think, worded it. And I really love that quote of his. I'm going to steal it. But
Fair enough.
But the thing is, that's kind of what Tolkien's getting at, is the elves believe in the Fea and the Roa being two separate things, the body and the spirit being two separate things. And this has its roots in, there's the flame imperishable, but also in the ancient, I'm trying to remember, you have Judeo-Christian beliefs with the body and the spirit. You also have, I'm rolling my eyes just because I'm thinking, I'm trying to remember it all. Now, you had of course, Japanese who also had their beliefs about spirits and bodies. So what you did in one life, because your Fea, I guess you could say, in Japanese beliefs, would be reincarnated into another Roa. But any sins you commit would be your next life you would suffer for. Okay. So you have degrees of suffering. And as the fate of your soul or of your connection with the earth or in this mortal realm, this fallen world of sorts, is proceeding, you are living out your punishment from your previous life. But if, let's say, you lived and suffered a great deal in a previous life, you'll probably live out a better life in your next one, so that it's a matter that the soul is constantly being reborn into the next body. At the same time, the Bushi, that is to say samurai, believe that a part of your spirit is in your sword or your spear or your bows and arrows, so that you have to guard your weapons. If they're broken, you have to get them reforged. Otherwise, you'll lose a part of yourself. And that's, in my younger days, I was very fascinated by Japanese philosophical thought and history. So that's just going to be my delving into that a little. But with Tolkien,
well, obviously we see a lot of people's, individuals' spirits being trapped in objects, in Tolkien's world. So, certainly.
So, you have they invest a part of themselves into these items or whatever, because Melkor invested a part of himself into Arda, thus marring it. Arda marred. And another people who actually believed in this sort of spiritual investment into an object sometimes was the Norse people. The Scandinavians had similar belief systems, which means, like, you look at, I think, the story of Dwalin, I'm not sure about the pronunciation, and the story of Tyrfing, the demon sword, or this sort of hatred of sorts, and it would possess, and people at times or other times you'd draw it out and it has to kill someone before it can be resheathed. And Dwalin was imprisoned and made to forge this weapon, and he invested it with all this hatred for his captor into it, which made for a pretty evil weapon. But it
got a little Gurthang action going on here.
Actually, this was the inspiration for Gurthang, and it just wrought tragedy upon tragedy. And it's a great saga. And the trouble is, I think that Tolkien was also drawing from ideas like that. So you have Norse, I guess you'd say there's a lot of stories in Norse mythology and sagas that have these sort of motifs and ideas of parts of men's souls going into objects. So,
just to bring it back to Feanor, I mean, the Silmarils, one could say, invested part of himself in those gems as well. So,
but what makes the Silmarils also so special is that I think it was you had two of the Valaliers I was struggling for the term there. Who made the trees, and it's from those trees that the Silmarils were crafted. So there's a bit of the light of the Silmarils and two Valiers, primarily the tree one. I forgot her name temporarily.
Are we talking Yavanna?
Yavanna. You have a part of her, I think, in the Silmarils. Then you've got Fëanor, who invests a part of his own Fëa into the Silmarils. So you've got levels of investment into it. So this might also explain why the Silmarils are so special. You have Yavanna, part of her essence, and part of Fëanor's essence within them. So that
they're described as like sentient in a way. Like they seek out light. I mean, there's like it's not just, oh, it's a pretty gem. It's an actual
nice shiny rock.
Yeah, it's in its own, like its own living creature almost.
It's almost like the Silmarils are the main characters.
Yeah,
the Silmarillion.
In a way, I that's an interesting concept. I hadn't thought about that.
But fine for anyone reading the Silmarillion. Now I work as a janitor at a bakery at a Tim's, and one of the truckers who's from England and I got into a discussion of Lord of the Rings and Silmarillion the other day. He's English. I love Tolkien, so it was a natural bonding moment.
Nice. That's a fun conversation to just fall into.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun with it till we got scolded to keep bringing boxes in. But
all right.
But what he ended up saying was he had a hard time getting into the Silmarillion. And I had the thought only after he had left to go to his next drop-off. And I wanted to tell him, it's like, well, you look at the Silmarillion, it's not so much one story so much as a series of stories. You've got, like, I think Dan, I love how Dan ended up categorizing it in, I think, one of our streams or videos. And it's where the entirety of, like, the story of Finwë, Fëanor, up to the passing of Fëanor is basically one story. And then you've got the next story that begins right after that. And it's up until a certain point. And these are divided into, I don't want to say chapters, but you could almost make the entire Fëanor arc one book. And then you got the next book.
Yeah,
and
it's one of the things that I
described it that way. And I had the thought that.
Yeah, it's just one of the things that I try to do with videos on Lords is, you know, like take a character that's really interesting, Maedhros, and then basically take all of the passages about Maedhros and then kind of condense them. So you're just telling Maedhros' story in what, because that's one of the things that's, you know, you'll meet a character and it seems interesting, and then you're not going to hear about that character for a while, and then he'll just creep up as part of this. And you're like, oh wait, I know that character, he's interesting, but you have to like wait, and there's like this like delayed gratification to like figure out what is this person's arc, what is this person's story going to be. So it's kind of fun to like take those arcs and just condense them to like, this is that story, bink, you know. So it's kind of one of the things I do.
It's funny you mentioned that. Lexi and I, when we did our live stream a while back, Girl Next Gondor, because I live streamed with her at one point, we ended up discussing Maedhros, primarily Fëanor and Maedhros. Oop, I think I.
Oh, you froze on me a little bit.
Okay, that was. Okay. Well, Lexi and I discussed how basically, well, just Maedhros is just one of the best. And we did an entire stream where we just took all the parts of Fëanor and Maedhros out and basically just debated them into the ground for, I think, what, 2 hours?
Gotcha. No, yeah, Maedhros is a really fascinating character, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
For sure.
And like one of the points in the stream at one point was that when reading the English edition, it's Maedhros the Tall. But tall translates into French as grand, which is to say, when you translate grand back into English, it's not tall. It becomes great. So you get Maedhros the Great when you're reading in French, not the tall. So she really loved that and said, oh, I love that because, you know, Maedhros is one of her favorites. Oh, I think you've spoken with her.
Yeah, I have. She was on the Dork Lords channel. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I'll have to check that stream. I haven't seen it then. But she's obsessed with Fëanor and Maedhros and them. So I think obsessed is the right word for it.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people are. I think that is those stories are really, really engaging,
Vivid.
and kind of similar here, where we've got these pretty multifaceted things that come out in the passage. With Andreth, we get this very complex individual that we see just in these few pages, but it's this person who she fell in love with an elf, which is not a thing people do. No one had done that before, theoretically. And he requited that love temporarily and then broke it off, and she was bitter about it. But she can still talk, as you mentioned, to the brother of her ex about stuff that's completely unrelated. She can put it aside and be like, you know what? I'm interested enough in academics and in knowing things from people who have knowledge that I'm willing to put that aside and be like, okay, brother of my ex, tell me about the marring of Arda. Great. And she's willing. She has the ability to verbalize these really complex emotions she's feeling to the brother of her ex. I think anyway, it's just really interesting.
It is
get this really deep vision of her.
And it's also fascinating how they discuss how, for example, elves are bound to Arda, as we keep repeating, but as for men, they are not bound to Arda. They are, I don't want to say bound to Eru, but they're bound elsewhere. Their
right. It's in some ways, their Fea, the Fea is just visiting in a way. Like, it's not stuck here. When their Hoa dies, whatever you want, their Fea goes whoof, and it transcends Arda in some way.
Which, I wish that Tolkien had written a bit more about the dwarves as well, because I wonder what's up with their Fea.
Because I feel like had he lived long enough, I think there would have been a dwarven version of the Silmarillion, because the Silmarillion is really an elven story. And I think there would have been a dwarven version of the Silmarillion, and it would have been really fascinating. But in any case, we don't have that.
And I think that with the dwarves, I wonder if maybe they're bound more to basically their creator.
They've got a reincarnation myth, at least. Durin. We don't know whether that's actual or just legend or whatever, but they feel that the spirit of Durin comes back into like the great leaders of their time.
Now,
at least the Longbeards. What's that?
But here's where it's interesting with the frame narrative, is that this is an Elvish story, but the thing is, Bilbo had access and connections with the dwarves, so there are a few addendums in the Silmarillion where you have the dwarves who are mentioned as what was it early on? Their creation myth, in a way, is slipped in, and you have things such as the dwarves believe that in Dagor Daggerath, they're going to be joining in the forging of the new Arda Unmarred, at least in some capacity. So, to an extent, I wonder if in the frame narrative, they were at some point consulted and shown this kind of Elvish book, and they went, oh, okay, well, here's what we think of this. And because it would have been just like Bilbo and even Frodo and Sam to consult with the likes of Gloin or Gimli or whomever was around at the time, or Bomber. I really like Bomber. He's my favorite. And
fair enough.
And just ask them, what do dwarves believe? At which point they would have probably gotten quite nearful. So, and
the other point being that we do know, for instance, they've got their secret language. They're secretive in a lot of ways. You'd have to get their trust, but somebody like Bilbo could have gotten their trust.
I think that they're secretive about their language, but I think they would have been willing to divulge the belief of where are they going after they perish. And the fact that one of them might reincarnate hints that they might at least the line of Durin goes to the halls of Mandos. So there's something up with possibly, like you said, we don't know for sure, with the possible line of Durin, I think it is, coming back and reincarnating. So that line's Fea must be similar to, possibly to an extent, to the elves, but he's not of the elves.
Yeah, I hadn't thought that through, but you're right. I suppose, yeah, if you take it at face value, there seems to be some way station where when a Durin dies, that spirit goes and waits until a proper host is born, proper Hroa, and that Fea then goes up. I'm going to now enter that Hroa, and I'm going to be the new leader of the dwarves. I mean, if you take it at face value,
yeah.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I'm just fascinated by the entire Fea and Hroa aspect of this discussion. It's the most complex part of this debate between Andreth and Finrod. And honestly, like, when you actually try to apply it to other fantasy universes, it starts to get really interesting, but also like, it doesn't always fit. But then, not everyone thought about their world in the same way that Tolkien or even Howard, who the writer of the Hyborian Age, did. They tended to think about these sort of concepts, whereas most others, people, I guess, don't really like to think about it too much and go, well, it is the way it is. Whereas Tolkien just goes, how does the Fea work? But it's...
And you throw it into the idea, too, of, this is debatable in some ways, but the idea of like the Nazgul or wraiths in general, maybe the wraiths in the Barrow Downs or things like that, that they are perhaps beings of just pure Fea, that they don't have bodies anymore. That perhaps that is what the end result would be if Arda lasted long enough and the elves were basically being just incrementally weakened by the marring of Arda over time, would they eventually turn into wraiths? I think is kind of an interesting concept to say, like, what they, their bodies.
I tend to think of them as gradually becoming like Irish fairies, and then becoming even lesser than that, and becoming almost a voice in the wind crying out, and but nobody can really hear them. Hear
the voices. Uh-oh. The third voice to talk to the early humans. But yes, I hear what you're saying. Right. We're told that in some ways the Fey and the Hroa have to interact together. You can't really have an individual, an entity requires both to be an actual, functional entity.
Yeah, and what happens with, funny you mentioned the wraiths, the ring wraiths, the Nazgul. In their case, the Hroa is corrupted, as is the Fea, by their rings of power, which, interestingly, in the case of the dwarves, just simply worsen their greed and... Oh, sorry, that'd be the dog. Sorry, 1 second.
Awesome. What's our dog's name?
Jet. He sometimes opens the door so he can come into my room and climb up on my bed.
I have a cat. Officially, his name is Pippin. Although his day-to-day name is Mr. Pickles. Mr. Pickles is asleep right now on his cat bed that's shaped like a Grogu bassinet.
Oh yeah, I've seen those. I like the Kirby ones where it looks like Kirby's eating you.
Oh sure.
I saw them in Japan at one point, and I went.
He's almost destroyed this thing, so maybe Kirby will be next.
There are even beds I think like that with Kirby, and it's like I just look at them and I go, why? But I also want that at some point because I like Kirby. But yeah, like I wonder if with the dwarves, if maybe there was something in the rings that didn't interact well with their Fea, and so that's why they basically
they had more resistance
together. Whereas with men, it seems like to a large extent, I got the feeling that it kind of damaged the Fea as much as it damaged the Hroa of the men who donned the rings of power, so that we get this dialogue between Fea and Hroa, and it's not working well. That's a perversion of what.
I got you.
Like with the elves, it's like Sauron was in a way semi trying to turn them into elves, but it's not a process that works well.
Okay.
And or at least not deliberately trying to turn them to elves exactly, but like molding them almost into a perversion of the elves, a mockery in a way or something. I don't know what you think of that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I thought of it, I mean, it's kind of simplistically, I just thought of it as, oh, well, the rings basically force one to obey the will of Sauron, and so you have the pain that it creates. When we see Isildur talking about how it pains the ring, that's his Feya, in a sense, battling against Sauron's Feya. Like, I don't want to be corrupted by that, and it just eventually takes him over because Sauron's Feya is gonna win that fight every time. But I like that idea too.
Spirit. Sauron. There's the Feya and the Roa kind of that are out of tune with each other, and I guess being stretched to their limits. But with the rings, it's corrupting both and distorting them in a way. And you do have Sauron coming in and interacting directly with them, so that I don't think a Maiar interacting in that way with a Feya or a Roa was ever supposed to happen. But well, no, duh. I guess some people our comment might say,
or if you believe it, Eru, it was all supposed to happen. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah. Well,
even the discordant notes were planned or whatever. Yeah.
Well, you also have Eru who had to change his plans in the Second Age, so who knows?
That's right.
Yeah, but whereas with Finrod, he seems to believe that it's through men and that that hope is to be found for the elves, because the whole Degger Deggeroth and second music of the Aegnor. And he also suggests the idea that as Arda is one big drama, maybe Eru's going to have to interject himself into the drama. He'll still be outside of it, but he'll have to incarnate himself into it, take on a Roa in order to interact with the world and undo the damage of Melkor. And this is where this is where Tolkien's kind of inserting a bit, or at least hinting at a bit of his Christianity. But one has to bear in mind, he's not really writing fantasy as we might understand it today, like with Dungeons and Dragons or Dragonlance or Game of Thrones or something. He's writing more. Yeah, he's writing more in a context of mythology. And heck, well, at least on our channel, we read very voraciously a lot of Howard's literature these days, and Robert E. Howard tend to refer back to Norse sagas and even some Japanese and Mongolian sagas and folklore, so that he seemed to have more folklore and mythology in mind as well. And to an extent, he wanted to create all these stories for Texas, just as Tolkien was kind of doing for England. But he also liked having.
It reminds me of one of my favorite authors. I haven't read a lot of him lately, but I should go back and reread. But it was Michael Moorcock's like Stormbringer saga, Eternal Champion idea, where he basically would put his character, his Eternal Champion, in these different mythologies and show how this is how this champion would thrive or not thrive in this mythology. Here's how he would thrive or not thrive in this mythology. And so you would, anyway, it was kind of interesting. He played a lot with mythologies as well.
Yeah.
Which I appreciated.
Whereas with Tolkien, he's kind of flirting a little of Christian myths, which refers back to a discussion he had with Lewis, where he believed that mythology had a grain of the truth, but that all roads lead to, I think it was Christianity, to his mind. So he's kind of putting that in the background as the road leads there, but this is its own separate branch of mythology as well. as separate from Christianity as, say, Norse or Greek mythology is, but it's headed in that direction in a way. At least that's how I understood it to an extent. I might have misunderstood.
I mean, he was a
supposed to
very
work
devoted
with
Catholic,
Tolkien.
so it would make sense that would find its way into like his hierarchy of mythology, perhaps.
But on the other hand, he was a very devoted mythologist, and
oh yeah, no, and a lot of his stuff is based, on Finnish mythology. A lot of it's based on Norse, as you mentioned.
yeah,
You've got a lot of Anglo-Saxon, a lot of Germanic in there. He interweaves a lot of different mythologies for sure.
And some of his most fascinating work, such a hinted at in this story, is the Roa and the Fea thing, which is in the Andreth story. But this brings into question, I wonder to an extent whether or not Aegnor, whether he could have reincarnated. Because, you're supposed to make amends with those you've wronged. But I wonder if he was able to, because he did wrong Andreth, for example. But
interesting.
Get her forgiveness.
Well, I think from the...
But that would have to
because if you put the stamp of the Doom of Mandos on all those folks, which you do on the Noldor, the implication is you have to do something special to get out of the halls of Mandos. And obviously Finrod did that. So do we know, is there... What's that?
Orodreth also did, I think.
Well, we have Glorfindel manages to, be reborn as well. But so we don't have, there's no writing that says, and Aegnor, like with Finrod, it's like he lived with his father in the fields of, we don't get that with Aegnor. But is it possible? I think it's possible, but I think what you're saying is, on the ledger of deeds, would he abandoning of Andreth be counted against him to the point that he wouldn't be allowed to be reborn?
But there's also the implication that elves need to, get the approval of men to, for the second music. And I always kind of took it as Andreth might have to put in a good word for him later on, which I always thought it'd be interesting if she did do it to an extent. I know that's delving into fan fiction almost, but I think that we see in this story, to an extent, her finding some degree of closure regarding Aegnor. Just as
I agree. Yeah. No, I agree. I think whereas we see that Finrod grows from this conversation, I think we see that Andreth also comes to some measure of understanding that she didn't have prior to this conversation. So I think they both come out of it with a little more understanding of the other. And so, I think she probably comes out of it with a little more understanding of Aegnor's situation, circumstance, why, that he wasn't just a jerk. He actually had these reasons, and whether they're good reasons or not, they were good reasons to him at the time. And I could imagine a scenario years later where she's able to, forgive him.
Yeah. I actually have to admit, I'm not terribly fond of Aegnor after this story, but I am fond of Andreth. Which
it's possible because she, as we say, she outlives Aegnor. She dies in her 90s. We're not sure where Aegnor is buried, if they even find his body after the Battle of Sudden Flame. But if, let's say, he was buried somewhere, I could imagine her going to that spot, perhaps. I don't know, and just like acknowledging their relationship. I don't know. There's another more fanfic for you. Andreth visiting the grave of Aegnor. But no, I like your interpretation that somehow after Aegnor is killed in the Battle of Sun Flame, he's in the halls of Mandos, and in order to be reborn, somehow, I don't know who would it be, Ulmo somebody would like enter her dreams or something and ask for forgiveness
Well,
on behalf
I
of
didn't
Aegnor.
interpret it as that. I meant like when it comes time for the second music and whatnot.
Okay.
So,
You mean way down the
that,
line. Okay.
Yeah, like the elves would need to get the approval of men. For him, it might be something like her needing to put in a good word for him.
I see.
And
Yeah.
I like the irony of that, but that's my own thoughts, because I always thought that the elves did have to get the approval of men for the second music, and for the most part, it's given, as is implied. But as for Andreth, hers is a bit more of a tragic fate, in my opinion. But I wonder if, and this is where I'm just kind of pondering it, it's at this point that men kind of gain the understanding of Roa and Fea as the elves do, and Andreth passes it down to the next person in the line. Like she passes down these teachings because
I think we should point out, I don't know that we have pointed out yet, but just the fact that of our, we mentioned the big three elven human relationships. This is the only one, on record where it's the woman is the human.
Yeah.
Usually, it's the Baron and Aragorn and Tuor. And so there is there's a different aspect to it because of that, I think, too. Anyway, it's just interesting.
Here's something weird I noticed in most other fantasy universes. It's usually the elvish woman and the human man. Usually. Everyone follows that. I've only known one exception, and that was with Kithkanon and it's going to bug me. I can't remember her name. Giselle, I think it was, in Dragonlance, and that led to tragedy because Kithkanon had a roving eye. So when she grew old, he turned away from her to go for another maid, at least an elvish maiden, and she then decided to go to her doom. And when he found her corpse, he regretted his decision, and was never the same afterwards.
I should say, obviously there's a lot of controversy around Rings of what it did or didn't do, but I think they did take Aegnor and Andreth as inspiration for they had Bronwyn so they have a human woman in love with an elvish man. And I think that relationship is based on perhaps this one, although we'll see if it's unrequited at some point or not. But
I didn't really know because I didn't watch the show.
That's fine. I don't want to get into the Rings of Power. I'm just saying they have a relationship similar to this, although at this point they're still actually in love and they haven't turned away from each other.
They've not. He hasn't gotten cold feet like
he hasn't gotten cold feet, and it is a time of war, so he could be like, "Hey,
that contradicts."
Peace out.
I'm kidding. That contradicts Finrod. Darn you, Finrod.
That's right.
I love the Finarfinians. It's just they're a very different breed than the Feanorians and Fingolfinians. In a lot of ways. All three lines seem to have their own traits.
Agreed.
And
we're told too about the difference in the three brothers, or you say two half brothers or whatever. But with Feanor, Finarfin, and Fingolfin, that the line of Finarfin was the wisest, and Fingolfin I think was the noblest or something like that. And then the Feanorans were the best with crafts and the smartest essentially. So they have the intelligence.
Yeah, and we also learned that Fingolfin and Finarfin also were closer because they're on the same page for the most part. I think the difference between Finarfin and Fingolfin is that this is where I'm really going to come down hard on Fingon. And I'm going to apologize ahead of time to a lot of my fans who are big Fingon fans.
I'm a Fingon fan. I think he does some awesome stuff.
Dragged his dad kicking and screaming into the kinslaying and into Arda to an extent. When he said, "Okay, I'm going to follow after, Maegor and whatnot."
Okay, you think that choice
with his dad basically going, "I can't just stay back. I have a son in this. My kids are involved. My people are probably going to follow Feanor to their doom. I gotta go in
Well,
there.
that's
And
kind of what Fingod's doing, right? He's like, I can't stand back. My best friend is now engaged. I have a duty to help those,
And while Finarfin took one look at it and went, nope.
Yeah, exactly. I'm out. Remember, I'm the wisest one. So, no, please, don't listen to me, the wisest of the elves. That's fine. I'm just going to go back here.
Yeah, I think that
even his children, even his kids didn't listen to him. That's pretty bad. Where you're like, wow, the guy known for his wisdom, and he's like, I think we should leave. Nope. Like, okay, all right.
I think that for Fingolfin, I don't think he would have listened, only because, he's got skin in the game, so to speak. So he can't bring himself to listen. He's like, well, I did swear an oath to Feanor that I would support his.
And there's that moment. There's that moment when, Feanor's crossed. He's burned the ships, and he's done it basically so that Fingolfin can't follow. He's like, screw it. Now I've lost that stupid Fingolfin who I hate. And so Fingolfin, I think, has every right in that moment to be like, you know what? We tried. He burned the ships. Yeah. What am I going to do? We're out. I'm going to join Finarfin. We're going back. But he's like, damn it. It's like, it's a challenge. I'm going to go give this guy a piece of my mind. We're going across the Helcarax. Say, yeah, a bunch of us are going to die en route. Who cares? We're going. And
I wonder if it was Fingolfin who decided that, or if it was some of his people who said, yeah, we're still going. Yeah, Fingolfin. Oh, shoot.
I think in the text, there's a sense
on the other hand,
like determined.
Would this have stopped?
Just that he was determined to go, and then it was even a sense of perhaps making sure that he wasn't to stop whatever evil perhaps that Feanor was up to.
Yeah,
perhaps.
I'm pretty sure the text does say that. There's also the matter of, I wonder if Fingon and the other children of Fingolfin and Finarfin would have really stopped there. They seem determined. So I like to read into it that Fingolfin, yes, went out of, yes, I'm determined, but it was also somebody's got to protect these crazy kids. And
I would have loved, and this is more fanfic, would have loved to have that reunion. If Feanor had survived long enough, he didn't. If Feanor had survived long enough for Fingolfin to find him, and that meeting of like,
ooh,
whatever would be said in that moment. I mean, I know Fingolfin had made this promise. Look, hey, you're the leader, blah, 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 blah. But boy, that was, burning those boats really.
Well,
anyway, it'd be interesting.
The difference is Feanor was no warrior, and Fingolfin is probably the greatest warrior of the elves. So if there was a physical fight, I don't think it would be.
No, exactly. No, I hear you. Just would there be? I think there'd be this. I want to, but I can't because I said I wouldn't.
Exactly. He would not fight his brother, and that's the key to Fingolfin's character. He'll never bring himself.
But I'd like to see that written out. I mean, Tolkien writing that let's call it an argument. There'd be an argument at least, and what would that argument look like? I think it'll be really interesting.
Oh, I love this comment by Nora87. This was the first deeper look into a human heart. The fear of not just growing old and being dead, but also being somewhat despicable. It can be very well applied or matched to our modern day fears. Yeah. Yeah.
Well said.
Yeah. Here's where I wonder about it, is that, yes, she would grow old, but she was not afraid of growing old. But I wonder if, and this is a huge if the possibility of growing old with her was given to Aegnor, as it was given to Luthien and possibly even Idril, and even to Elrond, Elros, and the choice of these half elves or these wives of humans was given to Aegnor. This might sound a little harsh towards him. I don't think he'd make the choice. They would have. Luthien and even Elros, even Elrond, in my opinion, are 10 times braver than Aegnor. I don't think he had their courage in a way.
Well, I'll say this. While I tend to agree, based on the evidence we have, I tend to agree with you. I'll throw up this defense for him in that we're not hearing it from him, right?
Yeah.
There is a sense of like, I'd like to, hear him from his own lips talk about the amount of love he had for her. I mean, this becomes much more, there's a lot more pathos to it. If he really did feel this intense love for her, and yet he decided, for whichever of those reasons, to reject that relationship because he thought it was best, even though he feels a strong sense. So it's possible that, but yeah.
I do think he did have that love. There was that pathos, but I do think there was also mixed with that pathos, the pathos of fear, the pathos of, well, I only have so much time left.
Yeah. His priority list wasn't like, she wasn't at the top. She's not at the top of the priorities.
She's not even top 5.
Yeah, top 5. Top 5 for You're like number 7. 7th priority.
6 or 7, maybe 23.
Somewhere between.
Yeah, like I said,
okay, 7's a little high. I mean, 7. Come on. I mean, there's a lot of things. So yeah, 15, 16. 16. There. That's my final offer. Your 16th priority. But yeah, no. What we know on face value, it seems like he was not. The idea of sacrificing for love is not something that he was really up on doing.
He was more, in a way, he was more the warrior archetype, while she was more the magician, or the crone, I should say, just to refer back to Jungian thought, which is a fascination of mine, although I'm not as well versed in it as Dan, who was the psychology major between us two. I was more history. And
myself.
Thing about what?
History myself. I was a history major, theater and English minors, then off to law school and blah blah. But whatever. Love
theater, love Shakespeare, even though I'm French. Shakespeare probably would not have felt the same way for me. But I'm joking. Just because some of his plays, that's French.
Oh, by the way, so just cluing in the audience a little bit. I was chatting here, and we were talking about, you were saying, oh, I'm hoping to be able to at some point to move to Saint Pierre, this island.
Yeah, I want to move to France.
And I looked it up. I looked up Saint Pierre, and I found a really cool little piece of trivia, which I'm sure you know, but I'll throw it out there for the audience. Only person guillotined in North America on the island of Saint Pierre.
Oh,
and that was in the 1800s, and they still apparently have the guillotine in the little town museum. So there you go.
Yeah. I didn't know about that, but I did know that there was a guillotine on the island. But the last guillotine
harsh justice
used by the French was the last guillotine used in France was in 1939, I believe, or 1940, and Christopher Lee got to see it used.
Whoa, that guy's life. Wow.
And
that's a life you want to lead.
Now, I believe some of the museums in Paris still have the guillotines, and they're still sharp. They still maintain them.
I'll bet you the museum guy in Saint Pierre is like sharpening up the guillotine. This is it. This is the one. Anyway, it was just an interesting little factoid about that place. But you want to go there because you're also interested in the sea, much like several of our heroes in Tolkien myth. And so, there you go.
For me, it's because I guess you could say my current, I don't know, like they're not married, but I guess you could say my stepfather loves boating, loves fishing, and took me out on the boat a few times. And since then, I always loved swimming and skating. So now I'm kind of gripped by sea longing. I'm like Tuor. I'm like, I don't need the sea. Then suddenly, it's like, here, kiddo, here's the sea. Let's get on the boat. And the minute I'm on it, I'm going, I need to be closer to this.
Very nice. I have my grandfather was in the Coast Guard on the Chesapeake Bay. And so as a little kid, we used to visit, and he'd take us out on the boat. It was like, oh, it's really cool. But this one day, he let me steer the boat. Okay, I'm a little kid. I'm less than 10. I'm probably 9 years old. And he says to me, okay, I just need you to, if you see that lighthouse out there, just head for the lighthouse. And so, I don't know. You know, like, you're a kid, your idea of subtlety is like, there is none.
It's shot.
So we went toward the lighthouse like this. Yeah. I literally zigzagged our way. I could not go in a straight line. I would overcorrect left, overcorrect right.
My grandfather was also my grandfather's also impassioned with the sea and loves fishing, so it's also comes down through the bloodline. I guess you could say, and yeah, but there was something else.
You're Aldarian. You're
yeah, I guess so.
Constantly be at sea.
Although I got scolded for not liking Aldarian enough because I made a few videos bashing him a little and saying, "Well,
look, both sides have some."
No, I ended up saying
explaining to do, and that's another relationship that's really interesting and not just all love and roses. You know, this relationship, Aegnor and Andreth, it's got some definite dysfunction.
Oh, they could have talked
horrendous and Aldarian, big dysfunctions as well.
They have the worst custody battle. All the legendary.
Yes, they do.
And
you're like, whoo.
Yeah.
Anyway,
well, actually, I would have actually preferred to go to St. Pierre Miquelon or to any other place like that that's near France and find myself a good lighthouse and work at. But most lighthouses have been decommissioned.
All right, fair enough.
So
no, they're out there, but I hear you. Yeah, that's a tough gig. There's probably a very small number.
I think there's only one active French lighthouse.
All right. Well, there's one. There's one.
Well, maybe I'll make the phone call.
That's right. Throw LinkedIn. You get the lighthouse operators. No, but it's a cool. I like that you've got that sensibility and that kind of sense of purpose. Like, no, I really want to, be connected to the sea, which I think is cool. So good on you, sir.
And it kind of motivates some of my own writing. So I guess I share that in common with Tolkien and even Howard. But yeah, anyways, I think we've beaten the subject into the pavement. And
fair enough.
Yeah, with when it comes to the Fea and the Roa, and also the question of whether it was Eru talking to the ancient primordial men and women. And when I'm using men, I'm using the older.
You're using the term of art.
Yeah, humans and whatnot. I'm just clarifying that because I think there are people who might get confused. And in French, we don't have the term. We've never used the term men as in like all human beings. We'd say gens, people, or des humains, humans. So I
tend to say humans generally when I'm doing my videos, just because I'm like, we're not talking gender based here. We're talking but
the trouble with the French language is everything is gender based there. So
great point.
We're trapped.
No,
but the other thing. Oh, one last thing. Apparently, I just noticed it in my notes. It's proposed, I think, by Finrod that the physical universe of Ea, has a beginning and an end and is made of finite matter, at least in the opinion of the elves. What do you think of that part of the discussion?
Yeah, I mean, I think that plays into his point of saying, I think he said something like, you think we're immortal, we're not. Yes. What he said something like the hunter is tracking, or hunter's on the trail. He's slow to follow, but he's always on the trail.
Always
but the idea that
prey.
Always finds his prey. And so that notion that this is a finite, in some ways, we are living on an entity. That entity will have a lifespan, and at the end of that lifespan, it will be the end of our lifespan. And so, yeah, I think that's. I feel like that's what Tolkien is saying through the elves. I think that's I treat that as a fact as opposed to just, hey, that's a myth of the elves. I think that's actually what is
part of the
transpiring.
lore.
Yeah.
And with the elves, there's a finite, since their Fea is connected into the Roa so deeply, there's a finite lifespan to an extent. But since men, their Fea can ascend from, basically go outside the Roa, beyond the Roa.
That's the gift, right? The gift is you get to live past, your Fea gets to exist past the existence of Arda.
And just to refer to Star Wars, as I'm a big fan of the...
Always a good time to refer to Star Wars.
I particularly like the original era as supervised by George Lucas. From...
By the way, though, I'll just say this. If you haven't watched it, Andor, excellent best writing in a Star Wars show in a long time. Anyway, there you go. A little plug for Andor.
Well, what I was going to say was in the original 76 novel, co-written by George Lucas and someone else, up to 2008, that's when that's my favorite Star Wars era, because George is always micromanaging every story, it seems. And a lot of the stories got more deep into this sort of thing, I find. But in George's original vision, especially in the episode 4 novel, which has a few discussions between Luke and Ben, which are kind of like this, which is pretty fascinating, you get the sense that when the Roa, I'll say, comes to an end, the physical body ends, the soul is brought to the netherworld of the Force, which is where it is inevitably bound for, so that we're made more than just this physical flesh, as Yoda might point out. So George would refer to these sort of ideas in his Star Wars stories, and I wonder how much influence he later had from some of the Silmarillion and the writings of Tolkien.
Interesting.
But
yeah, he certainly.
But as I like to put it, I think I put it in at one point to, I forgot when, but George Lucas is basically the J.R. Tolkien of sci-fi.
Well, and he obviously he relied a lot on the Joseph Campbell, the Hero of a Thousand Faces, and Joseph Campbell relied a lot on Tolkien. So even indirectly, he definitely had a Tolkien influence for sure.
And Campbell was one of the most brilliant men of his time, because, I don't know, I've read some of his work and I just find it.
I've watched the interviews, which are just
same. He's brilliant.
Yeah, he knows his stuff for sure. You were talking about mythology and people engaged in different mythologies. That guy, maybe the paragon of people who know about various mythology, Joseph Campbell.
Yeah. So, and I think Campbell would have been pleased with this discussion between Andreth and Finrod. And looking at the archetypes, you've got Finrod, who is obviously a magician. Same with Andreth. So you've got pretty much two magician archetypes, or a crone and a magician, going back and forth about this. But the sad thing is, I'm going to just talk in terms of archetype. You had a crone with a warrior. That could not have worked.
I got you. Those two archetypes tend to have a bad end, in other words.
Yeah,
if there is even such a
I would argue,
you can find examples.
If you're looking at it in terms of archetype, you have to be a lover archetype to be able to have a nice love story for the most part, unless you become a shadow archetype, at which point.
I mean, you could make the case that maybe she was like a love archetype
in her youth,
and then having been rejected, she ended up turning more to this wise
going
woman.
down a different path.
Yeah, going a different path.
Yeah, I like that. I'll just deal with the last few chat comments. But I am no man.
Great points.
Great points.
That's right.
Sorry, that one
little Eowyn reminder there. Yeah.
Sorry, I occasionally just, when talking English, I'll say of men, or the woman of this area, and then it's but there were also No, if you look at the majority, it's like the majority of the people in that area were either women or it's like, or I say of men. When I'm thinking about Tolkien's Legendarium, and then someone in the chat goes, but I am no man. It's that always gets me.
Right. Exactly. So in other words, yes, there's a place for humans, so to speak, in Tolkien's work as well.
Yeah.
Well noted, Nora.
Well,
also,
Tolkien
that's
always
interesting because there's that, Eowyn is in some ways fighting a prophecy there, where is up against, the prophecies say that blah, 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 blah. She's kind of like, I don't care about these prophecies. Life happens, and Eowyn's in some ways going, yeah, prophecy, schmophecy, whatever, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to now kill you.
But prophecy's in her favor because
right,
she's not a man. So a prophecy saying no man can defeat him.
I mean, you could go down a road. I don't want to jump down a rabbit hole here, but the idea that with Mary using the dagger, and that breaks the spell, essentially the spell that keeps the Witch King impervious, and then that allows Eowyn to kill the Witch King.
So it's a who did what?
Right.
Who does it talk about? I tend to think
of
it as,
hi, reflective rambling. Awesome to hear from you.
Yeah, reflective rambling is always best. I was just going to say, I think it's maybe both the prophecy refers to.
Yep.
Yeah, reflective rambling. She's always such
as good prophecies do. They get multiple interpretations.
Yeah, she's always the best. I'll just sorry that we're all pretty much at the end of it. Reflective rambling. Keep up with our guests.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks, reflective. That's right. Yeah. That's me on Twitter, Matt Rice.
Do follow, and I think this is your channel. So
awesome. Dork Lords. Cool. I've got a LOTR playlist, and it's got, I don't know, I'm getting close to 150 videos on there now, so it's a lot. Ooh. We do other stuff as well, but the Tolkien stuff is the most popular, and it's the stuff I'm most interested in. So,
any chance of ever getting any Howard stuff up there?
That's a good point. I mean, I know a lot about the Hyborian Age stuff and everything. I'm somewhat familiar with that stuff. So yeah. I think I would probably jump into the Michael Moorcock era stuff, maybe a little bit before that. But yes, I could be convinced to put some Howard stuff in there. H.P. Lovecraft, there's the Cthulhu mythos is interesting as well.
Huh. Well, I actually, a while back, I was like, I'm not into Lovecraft. I don't like Cthulhu stuff. But reading some of the letters and also the eulogy or of sorts, the written eulogy that for the newspaper that Lovecraft wrote on behalf of Howard's dad, I think, where he's
interesting. All right, a little connection.
He did this thing because Lovecraft was best friends with Howard. But when
Lovecraft was also, he was a racist, and so that's problematic. But his mythology is interesting.
But what Lovecraft did for Howard's family when Howard passed was he basically went out and stood by them and basically defended them and went out of his way to basically eulogize for Howard and say, well, Bob was my best friend, and it's such a tragedy that he's gone. And he just wrote this very, very beautiful eulogy. It's just very beautiful and moving.
Interesting. I hadn't seen that.
And
I have to check that out.
Yeah, Lovecraft, and he also wanted to save, because Howard had very dark thoughts, and Howard was had very big depression problems, and Howard ended up, I think on the internet it's called self-deleting after his mother passed, and Howard had one of the only people he ever confided such thoughts in was Lovecraft, who I think was the one who set Howard up with Howard's girlfriend. He kept trying to reach out to Howard and saying, get out of your depression, you got to live longer. We're going to make this whole essentially this tied up universe between ourselves. I'm going to tie in your stuff with my Lovecraftian horror stuff. We're working together here. You can't go off on your own. You got to stay here and work with me. But in the end,
so attempting to
save a soul,
lend some kind of a positive influence
but sadly,
Howard's life.
But sadly, what happened was it was not enough. Howard took his own life, and Lovecraft was apparently was apparently devastated. So
I'll say this: I just whatever you could buy some of these like mysteries in a box type things. I just purchased something from the Mysterious Package Company, which is like they have high production value. They come with these actual wooden crates. You have to pry it open with a pry bar, and then they have these artifacts in them. And this one particular one is an H.P. Lovecraft inspired mystery around Hastur. So I'm doing this Hastur mystery thing. Anyway, it's very Cthulhu-y and cool. But
yeah. So like I said, I'm not defending a lot of what Lovecraft believed, but there was something good in him. Like
no, well, just
and
I mean,
human beings.
He's no Tolkien, but he also did the idea of a world that transcends the story you're reading. Yeah, and he was good at that. And so much like Tolkien, you're reading a story and you're like, oh my God, this world is so huge. I'm just seeing this little sliver of it. That feeling is something that he could capture as well.
But that said, I don't like the Cthulhu Elder God stuff generally.
All right, fair enough.
But almost all my friends are into it, so I might at some point read it and just go, oh, whatever, sure. But But as for Howard, he's the only writer I think almost comparable with Tolkien, and I highly recommend his Hour of the Dragon, which we're doing a book club series of live streams with World of Conan, who was when I told him we're going to be doing a book club podcast soon of Hour of the Dragon, he said, no, you're not doing a book club podcast. You're live streaming it with me. I'm joining you. Let's do it. And it's like, oh, sure. Like, I'm going to say no to him. Like, I really like him.
Okay, gotcha. Right. That's a cool invitation.
So, yeah, I highly recommend Hour of the Dragon. I'm only about 5-6 chapters, maybe 7 chapters in. It's phenomenal. Now, I don't say this lightly. I love Lord of the Rings, but this is comparable in quality to Lord of the Rings.
Right.
And
as
Conan tastes despair and is almost broken and must rebuild himself and discover hope and set out on a journey to defeat a Dark Lord who has the heart of Ahriman, which empowers that. It's basically Sauron getting the One Ring, and Conan has to figure out a way to defeat him still. So it's a fascinating story, and you get shades of this Fëa-Roa relationship in the story.
Nice.
So
way to tie it back in as well, sir.
Yeah, I had to try.
That's right. No, it's good. That was good. It was a good tie-in.
Yep, but I'll just go through the comments and whatnot. Virtue hug, always the best. Okay, what do you boys want? To suck up. Nora, no worry, I understand everything. Oh, that's good. Well, Nora, from what I've seen in this chat, I think she's one of your fans. She's been pretty sharp.
Well, Nora's been great for sure.
Any chance? Sounds like a great chance for a collab.
Yeah.
Collab of who?
I think you're just saying that, like, people are reaching out and saying, like, hey, we should come onto my live stream. And you're like, okay, I'm in. It was kind of what happened here. You were like, reached out. I'm like, that sounds awesome. Let's do it.
Yeah, I basically ended up going, I don't think he's going to accept, but
I'll accept.
I don't know, but I really want to do this. And I reached out to another content creator as well. And I've got a stream that I'm going to end up doing, I think, in early February.
You're giving me inspiration to maybe try some live streams myself. I'm always a little wary of live streams, all the things, all the variables. There's almost too many variables could go wrong. But you know what? Do enough of these. Do this.
With this, it was either this discussion or I was going to beg for a Numenor discussion especially of Tar Kiryatan and Tar Atanamir, because you and Helen did that great live stream.
Call me back. I'll come back. We could talk. Is Tar Atanamir the Witch King?
I always like
let's do it.
Theory that I love your theory that Atanamir is the Witch King.
Yeah, I'm fairly committed to that idea, but yeah.
But I think that Tar Kiryatan is another one of the ring wraiths.
Okay.
So they're both.
I could buy that.
In a way.
Yep. Yes, and I'm good with that.
Where one's one of the other 9, but Atanamir is the big one, the Witch King. That's what I think.
All right, I think we align in our thoughts there. That's fine. Yeah, we can make
You'd
that
only
work.
need Helen to come on and challenge it.
Yeah, yeah. She's been on Dork Lords a couple of times. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I'll have
So
to check
she
those.
has strong feelings about the Witch King as well.
Yeah. That is so interesting and quite a way to try to motivate someone. Oh, referring to Lovecraft and Howard. Yeah. Howard was fairly committed to his literature and transmitting his philosophy that civilization is unnatural and man's most natural state is barbarism, but that this doesn't mean that the barbaric man is evil. Conan and Kull are noble, heroic characters. Conan has a lot in common with Aragorn, so at least in feats and accomplishments and in
that perhaps you don't need civilization to be a good person, in other words.
Exactly, yeah. But that civilization tends to corrupt man far more easily than barbarism, although barbarism certainly can corrupt. But that's what Howard was committed to with a lot of his stories, transmitting this philosophy in very good prose. But he eventually couldn't endure, I guess. And
it's a very sad story.
Yeah, so I've lost people to that kind of thing, and it's never easy. And
yeah, no, that's there's that. It's tough to even know what to say in those moments, right? When you like, these people are going through something so painful to themselves, and maybe it's coming out in the paper. Maybe there's some catharsis in writing, but I don't know. That's you just feel for someone who's undergoing that level of pain.
Yeah. I love the look of doubt, but our host is very picky about things in all the best ways. I'm French. We have a saying.
French. I'm French.
Yeah, we have a saying in French, "question tout," which is to say, question everything. And yeah, we have to question everything. Tout questionner. Je pense d'abord je suis, but question tout. That's it. Like, we question everything.
That sounds like a good attitude for a YouTube channel. So there you go. Perfect.
Yeah. Although it's cost me a few subs a few times because I question things a little too much. And some people,
you just stick to your guns, sir.
Yeah. But I understand why some probably get a little annoyed, because I questioned the Jackson movies, for example, recently and said, I don't really like them. Here's why. And some people actually had good reasons for not agreeing with me. And I do understand it, even if I'm like, well, I don't really like them. And I have a further podcast to make, because one of them, Batshine, a regular sub of my channel, said, okay, well, this was a very condensed video. How about you just make an entire playlist of this and you go scene by scene, if you have to, dissecting and relating it to the book, what's accurate, what's inaccurate, and what you like, what you don't like. Which
series of videos on all the trilogy, the first trilogy, and then the Hobbit trilogy with my my best friend Theron, who's my best friend in nerddom. And while we really enjoyed the first trilogy, we had significant problems with the Hobbit trilogy. But so I hear you. There are things to like and not like, for sure.
Yeah. And you know what? My eldest brother loves the trilogy and said, don't you ever talk smack about it.
Never doubt Peter Jackson.
On the other hand, I see it as I really don't care for it. So
I got you.
You know, you learn to just.
You're not the only person I know who has that. I do not share that. I think the Fellowship of the Ring is an amazing film in particular, and I love it. But I have good friends who are like, no, it misses the point of the books, blah, 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 stuff like that. So I hear you.
Yeah. But you know what? It's important to know how to agree to disagree. No.
I disagree. I agree.
I disagree with agreeing upon disagreeing upon agreeing to disagree. Anyways.
All right. Okay, so there we go. Reflective Ramblings, like encouraging me to do live streams. Okay. I'm scared. Okay, but no. Yes, of course I can do live streams.
Yeah, we'll have to do an entire history of Numenor and Tara-Kiritan and Tanamir next time.
Okay. All right. I'm on board.
Whether it's on your channel or this one, I don't care. I just want to have that discussion with you at some point because I
got you, Nora. Yep.
I'm here from Dork Lord channel. I mean, I'm okay with the phrase "man." I was just joking a bit. It's fine.
It was good.
There's so many people on this channel that razz me and whatnot.
They can't handle the truth.
But that's the thing. Even if you don't agree, you always listen. That's the key. If the world could listen to one another more instead of screaming, imagine that. Yeah. And if the world appreciated simple food and drink,
hold on.
Treasures, we'd be better off, I think, as well.
Way to pull that around. I love it. And yeah, you're right. You know, there are some channels that basically make a living at screaming and not listening. And I prefer to be a listener than a screamer, for sure.
Yeah. And you know what? Funny thing, I'm going to refer to another channel I work with, World of Conan, once again. And he and I, a few times in private, when discussing certain things, ended up going, well, I disagree. And what we ended up doing was then like ... Okay, so what do you think of this story? And, you know, like, it ended in a very cheerful conversation afterwards. So, yeah, like, it is possible to meet people and not end up screaming. It's just only on the internet where people seem to scream more than they listen. It seems to me.
Yeah, there's incentive perhaps to do that. But
I do give Hobbit films this. It gave me Richard Armitage singing, and I won't knock that. And I'll set up to let you guys wind up.
Oh, no, that's great. Yeah, you're right. I mean, that's Song by the Fireplace. Amazing. Really. Anyway,
Michel Armitage. And what song does he sing?
They're doing the now you're gonna get me. But they're singing at the fireplace. They do the a cappella. The dwarves are singing about the fire and the pines and anyway, it's a really beautiful rendition of one of the poems from The Hobbit.
Oh.
Yeah,
it's the Lonely Mountain song? Because I've heard that on YouTube a few times.
Yeah,
it's quite beautiful.
That's right. But anyway, it's beautifully done. And his voice is very deep and bassy and awesome.
I'll have to look for that. Because I honestly, I feel like I'm not the one in the conversation here.
No, but yeah, I mean, you've got to. I mean, Reflective Rambling is giving a great point. There are these moments that are beautiful in the Hobbit films. There are some moments that are very much not, but it's one of the really beautiful moments for sure.
The way I see it, if I hit 5,000 subs or something, I'll watch the Hobbit movies and just review them all.
Okay,
I'm setting the bar pretty far away.
You just said it. You just committed.
Oh shoot! Shoot. Well, at least I'll reach 5,000 if that's the case.
That's right. That's right. There's a good side of that for sure.
But you know what? I'll try to see about, I don't know, getting Dan to sing or something if we reach 10,000 or something. I don't know. That's not a commitment. Dan, occasionally I go, I'll try to talk Dan into this. Him, no. Okay.
Fair enough. I get that relationship. I understand that.
But then my brother will go, we're going to do this. And I'm going, I don't know. Come on, Joe. Fine. It's just.
You're the fine guy. He's the no guy. I get it.
Well, actually, I was called the no child growing up.
Oh, okay. Well, okay.
He's usually the one. Yeah. It's just when it comes to YouTube channel, he sometimes goes, no.
Well, we have a fun thing because the typical person that I'm doing a lot of my non-Tolkien stuff with is Paul. And Paul he's all into comic books, he's superheroes and that kind of stuff. He does not care for Tolkien. And so I'm constantly bringing up how everything comes back to Tolkien just to piss him off. And it's awesome. And I love doing it. And I get the eye roll and I'm like, that's right. That's a Tolkien quote. Boo, 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 boo. Anyway, so it's great.
Yeah.
So we have fun just picking on each other a little bit on because he'll make some snide comment about Tolkien, and then I'll come back. Paul is great. Thank you, Reflective Rambling.
It's conversations like that make me happy. My half siblings grew up hours away. Okay.
Fair enough.
Honestly, well, with me, I have 2 siblings hours away. One who lives pretty much with me, and well, a step sibling who lives hours away. So I'm content with that. On the other hand, I'm likely to probably get one of them to probably watch this later. They're probably going to watch this on their own, and they're going to go, "You're going to pay for that."
Did you just insult your half siblings?
But anyways, I'm going to have to post the link later to because I have to go out soon.
Sure.
I'm going to have to post the link to your Andreth video because it's spectacular video.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Good sir.
Well, I want to do that because I just think it's such a great video, but you're more than welcome. You're more than welcome. It's my pleasure, and I'm going to pin that down there because I want people to see it no matter what. And I think that since you're the bigger channel, most people probably already know about it, but in case they don't, I'm pretty sure I did put it in the description. And go check out Dork Lord's video. Like all his videos, share, subscribe, especially the Tolkien stuff.
That would be awesome.
And if ever you want, we could do this again. And
happy to do that. You mentioned Numenor. Let's do it. I'm good with that.
Okay. And don't forget to smash and like and subscribe over here.
Please do. Brothers Kryn. I like that you're the brothers and you have anyway, it's cool.
Yeah, it's a reference to Dragonlance.
Yeah, but it's also that you're actual brothers. I don't know. There's a cool familiar tie.
Yeah, we're brothers. And Kryn is the world of Dragonlance, like Arda. So
I had the Dragonlance modules way back in the TSRs. Anyway.
Yep.
Way back in the
We're
day.
Big Dragonlance fans. Anyways, take care, everyone.
Yep. Thank you so much, everybody. And thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
You're more than welcome.
Bye, everybody.